Hello and welcome to LangTime Chat episode 53. You want to say hi, David?
Hello, David.
Exactly. Good job, David.
But I didn't say hi, David.
No, you did not,
All
but
right.
I'll still give you a silver star for that
Oh.
effort.
Ooh.
Not a gold star.
All right.
All right, so we are going to be talking today about the process of conlanging when you have pre-existing material that you need to work with. This is actually part one, though. This is going to be a whole little mini series in the LangTime Chat universe. Not sure if you're ready for this. David is just now finding out about this. And I want to take a step back first and talk about the inspiration for this series. One part of it is that Jake requested a podcast focusing on an a posteriori conlang.
Hang on a sec.
Or on conlangs.
Is that Jake Penny who created a language for Madame Web?
Yeah, it is.
Hey.
The famous Jake Penny.
There we go.
Who made, oh shoot, I'm going to say the vowels in the language backwards. What was the language name? Can you say it for me?
Bankashka.
Thank you.
Say it Pahlali.
Pankashka. Is that about right?
Not river to Pahlali.
That's how I do Tapahla. All right, sorry, Jake. I just absolutely butchered your language name, which is beautiful. And yes, that is that Jake. And they had requested in our podcast channel if we would talk more about a posteriori work that we have done. So we're going to get there, Jake. I just want to say that's like in part an inspiration. We're going to do a little detour for the first two episodes, and then we'll get there, I promise. The next piece of information requires a new word that I coined. I decided we need the word framelang. So this is a type of conlang, often an artlang, if you're gonna look at it that way. So it is a type of conlang where you take existing pieces that were never really intended or had never really been fully fleshed out into a language, and you take those pieces like place names or character names, sometimes even phrases, sometimes even full sentences written in this form, and you turn that into a complete working language. And so this is what David and I sometimes do. David has done it more than I have, but I have now worked on projects where I've done that. And there's really no word for it. I was using, when I actually originally put together this presentation, I was using retcon because that was like the closest thing, like retconning the language. That was the closest word I could think of, but it wasn't quite right. It didn't quite fit what it is we do when we work with it. So I decided framelang because if you frame something, you're providing a structure for it. And so you're taking all these pieces and you're actually sculpting or casting or forging something new out of it by providing a structure to build it out. And so that's why I chose framelang. It's also fun to say. Framelang.
Yeah.
All right. So that's a little side note. We're going to use framelang from here on out, so be ready.
Definitely better than backlangration.
Oh, goodness. That is very on point, David. Okay, so then in a Q&A session, while actually doing a presentation in London at Ben's place of work, and so Ben had organized the whole talk, an audience member who happens to be named Sowen, and I am so sorry if I spelled your name wrong on the slide, Sowen, if you ever see this, but that's how I wrote your name down in my notes. But Sowen had asked if we had ever created a framelang that was actually based on English input. So instead of, for instance, taking the names or the words from like Dune, which are very much supposed to be written in this other language, the Furman language, she was like, well, have you ever just done it with English to see like what you would come up with for your own, like to make it work as a new language? So anyway, it's going to work. Don't worry. You're going to see the experiment. I'm going to go into detail about how this is going to be set up, but this was a major piece of inspiration for the first part of this mini series.
Yeah. I want to say it's very rare that we get a question that we haven't heard before. This was absolutely a question that we hadn't heard before. In fact, it caught me so off guard that I had to make sure that I was understanding it right. Really kind of an absolute stroke of genius. And it's like we've given a number of talks. Some of them are quite similar, and so you can usually predict the types of questions you get for the given talk. This one just came straight out of left field. It was amazing.
And yeah, even better that it was an incredible question, and both of us went no, but now we're gonna try that. All right, so this whole series is going to be a 5-part series. We are currently on LangTime Chat episode 53, which is going to introduce our English-based Frameling experiment rather. And it's going to introduce the material we're actually going to use. And this is going to be one of those challenges where we then get a month to work on what we're working on. And then we'll have a results episode and we'll compare what we came up with. Now, of course, as I say that, really, David and I are the two that have to do it. That's our homework. We have to do it. For all of you viewers out there, if you're interested in doing it, you are more than welcome to do it. And if you want your results included in the next episode, I'll talk about it more later. But you can actually submit your work to be included in the challenge. And so that means episode 54 will be the results from our Frameling experiment. Episode 55 is going to shift to really focus on what Jake had asked about, which is we're going to just talk about highlights of a posteriori conlangs that David and I have created. And so it'll be a little mix mash. And so we'll just talk about some highlights and, the process or, things that are different from when you do a priori conlanging and whatnot. And that's going to set us up for episode 56, where I am going to start another challenge round. And I will present material we'll use for a little a posteriori conlanging fun. And then episode 57 will present the results from that. So a 5-part mini series. Be ready. The next, 5 months going to be taken up by this. Woohoo! All right, so first, let's talk more about the process of creating a frameling. And I'm just going to give a very brief example, actually a couple of examples, just to sort of show what it is you're looking for or that we're looking for when we do it. So that if you do want to participate, but you've never attempted something like this, hopefully you can get an idea of what you need to be thinking about. So we're going to look first at a very brief example of Dune and the work that really David did the setting up of the language. So David did the hard part for Dune 1, specifically for the Chicopsa language, focusing here. But I was able to work with him on Dune 2 to sort of flesh it out. So I got to be a part of that process. But yeah, David, you did the hard work. And I thank you for that.
Yeah, kind of. I didn't have much translation to do. Wasn't like, I can't imagine having the amount of translation we had for Dune 2 and creating the language at the same time.
Oh, that would have been awful.
That would have been too much.
And I only say awful just because it would have been overwhelming to try to get all that done, plus all of the translation that was requested or required for that movie. Yeah. And
it was also a bit of luck that I'd already read the book.
That is very helpful.
Yeah.
And what I'm about to show is a very short list of just names that were used in the books, because I'm going to talk about, it may just look like a short list of names, but you can actually get a lot of linguistic information just from a small amount of data, a small amount of input. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on. But David, I know there was more than just character names that you had pulled as you worked. What other kinds of data did you have from the books that you were, or book rather, since it's just the first book that you're working with?
There were single words and character names, which you get in pretty much all books of this type, but there were entire phrases. And the thing that made it most difficult, but also, I guess, perplexing in the way that you engage with it, is there were phrases that were given definitions, and these definitions were given by characters, which makes it a bit challenging to engage with when you think about it. For something like, for example, in the book A Game of Thrones, there were Dothraki phrases that were then translated in italics.
Hmm.
And so for that, you have to take it as basically as truthful as the narrative itself, if not more so. It's essentially the book equivalent of
Subtitles.
subtitles, yeah. However, when a character tells you that something means this, that's a bit trickier. And I can actually get into some of those, but I think I should wait until we've actually moved
Hmm.
on. So let me come back to that, and I'm going to want to talk about these two. But I would like you to do what you're going to do first, and then I'll come back to it
That is,
before we
just
leave
as a
these.
side note, a really cool point about the framing of language used in fiction anyway, in terms of what you end up interpreting as more truthful, just because it's like the narrator who's, if you don't believe the narrator, then everything is false that you're being told, versus a character's inner thoughts or dialogue. And that's
Yeah.
fascinating. And I could go on and on about that.
For just a really quick one, I want you to compare, for example, two hypothetical novels. One of them, uh, just a faceless third person narrator says, um, he went to talk to his friend Garrett. Garrett was there with his brother Stephen. Okay? You read that, and I mean, if that's not true, what is?
Hmm.
Right? This narrator isn't a person, it's not a character, right? It's just telling you the story. And so you just have to accept that as true. On the other hand, imagine it's done this way. Um, you know, let's say, I don't know, John walks into the house where he sees Garrett, whom he had met once at school. Garrett says, "Hey, this is my brother Stephen." All right. If that's all you got, it's perhaps true, likely true. It could be true. It could be false. Stephen could not be his brother. That guy could not be named Stephen at all. You don't know because all this was, it was in Garrett's, it's
It's,
what he said,
yeah.
basically. And so basically, you as the reader are supposed to evaluate whether that's true or false based on your understanding of the character. You might not know this character very well at all. You may learn later on that this character was lying for a very specific reason, right? Or it may be the type of thing where later on in the story you learn that Garrett learns, I'm adopted. And so technically this guy isn't my brother and I thought he was. Or maybe this guy changed his name. You don't know. The point is that if it's a character saying it, you say, all right, the characters around him are supposed to believe this is true at the moment, with the absence of further details. If it is just the narration itself, you really have to believe that's true. Anyway, and so that applies just as well when you're talking about language and a character saying this is what this means versus the narration telling you this is what this means.
Nice. All right. So, getting back to
Yep.
Dune and the small sampling of names and what kind of information you can get from them. So, here are 6 names that are used in Dune. We've got Muad'Dib, Lisan al Gaib, Fremen, which is really the name of a whole people, Sayyadina, Sihaya, and Usul. Now, these were obviously not pronounced in the book, and usually books don't go into my name is pronounced and then they, try to give some sort of pronunciation guide. Doesn't often happen that way. And so instead, what you have are what you're assuming are faithful or attempted to be faithful romanizations where they're trying to be as helpful as possible to give clues to what the pronunciation is. And so, as the person taking these names, which are in written form and not phonetic, you then have to decide, what do I think the author was thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's easier than others.
Yeah.
So, what you get as you figure out, based on how you think sound should be assigned to these written forms, you end up getting a minimum sound inventory from what words you're using, or in this case, the 6 names that we're using. You get a minimum sound inventory. And I say minimum because if the sound is in the name, then the sound needs to show up somewhere in the language. Otherwise, that would be odd. And so that's fine, but that doesn't mean that's all the sounds of the language. Like these 6 names don't necessarily have every sound ever of the language. So it's just a minimum, but like you can at least start building a system if you map out, once you figure out how you think these things are pronounced, you can map out and you get a minimum inventory. And the minimum inventory for what needed to be the language for these 6 names included a B, as in the end of Muad'Dib, a D, as in the middle of Muad'Dib, a G, as in Gaib, an F, as in Fremen, S, as in Sayyidina, as well as some other names, H, as in Sihaya, in that middle H. The W here, I assigned it to the U because it's really kind of pronounced moi, moi, and so you get like a Muad'Dib, is how we assumed it was pronounced, but of course it could have gone another way. The R, as in Fremen. Now, of course, is that an R, or is it a tap, or is it a trill? Because this could be Fremen, Fremen, or Fremen. It could be any of those. And so deciding which R you want is up to the conlanger, of course, but it does need an R-like sound. The L is in the end of usul. The Ya is in sihaya. The M is in fremen. And the N is in the end of lisan. These are our minimum consonant inventory.
It's already pretty big.
It's already pretty big. It already gives a very nice structure. It's pretty balanced in terms of how you look at the layout of the sounds. There are, of course, some decisions to be made because in these names only voiced stops occur. And so then it's like, do you want voiceless stops? And David had decided, well, yes, we do. And I think that was, of course, the decision to make. Plus, again, David had more than 6 names to work with. But just from these 6 names, this is the limit. But there's already a very nice inventory to start with. And so deciding what else to flesh it out with is something that you do as a conlanger once you reach that stage. On the vowels, we know that there is an E, U, A, and A sound. And so like the E from lisan, the U from usul, the E from fremen, and the A from sihaya. Now, how those are actually, the vowel qualities are always the worst. Am I right, David? Because it could be E as in fremen, but it could be E as in fremen. And so, like you have to decide where you're going to end up putting those qualities. But again, it gives us, at minimum, you have to have these 4 vowels in the system. Again, David had more to work with and built more into it, but at minimum, we needed these 4 vowels. Let's bring back good memories. That's what I thought. So the names also give information about syllable structures. And so, they show us what the, not necessarily the maximum syllable structure can be, but it does say you have to have at least this. So again, it gives us the minimum of like, you have to allow at least this in the language. And so breaking these down by syllable, if you're looking at the PDF of the presentation going along with it, you'll see that I've added little hyphens to separate out the syllables. And what you can learn about the syllable structure is that the language allows coda consonants. And so, for instance, lisan, you end in that coda N. But it also, you learn that really a lot of different kinds of consonants are allowed in that coda position. You get voiced stops, like at the end of dib. You get the liquid L at the end of usul. You get a ya at the end of sayyadina. You get like, there's actually a geminate, which we'll talk about in a moment as well. But it's allows, a lot of times when you hit a language where it's like they allow voice stops there, they probably allow a lot of things there in the coda position.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing if only like the L and the N showed up, you might be like, well, you do have coda consonants, but it's going to be limited. But by the time you get a stop there, it's like, all right, we'll open those doors a little bit more. It also allows consonant clusters. So like the FR of Fremen, it has onset consonant clusters. We don't see any coda consonant clusters, and so that's not something that these names provide for us. That doesn't mean you can't include them. It just means that that's not the minimum that you need to meet here. And then also Muad'Dib. And al-gaib, we have ai and wa diphthongs. However, you could have analyzed this differently and said it was muad'Dib. You could have said, nope, there's no diphthongs. And so in that case, you get, a different syllable count. Instead of muad'Dib, you get muad'Dib. And instead of al-gaib, you get al-gaib. And you get these separated. So that depends on how you interpreted the romanization as you were looking at the written forms. And finally, we also know that geminate consonants are allowed because we have this 2D in muad'Dib, and then the two Y's of sayyadina. This is, again, taking the author as being able to provide the best way to write out the sounds of the name, because we're trusting them, because if Sayyadina is not meant to have a geminate consonant, you would think, well, there would only be one Y. Like, why would you write two Ys if it's just Sayyadina? So you're trusting the author that they made a choice and used two Ys for a reason. And so we're going to honor that reason, and we're going to say that geminate consonants are allowed. Anything to add to the sounds?
Not yet.
Okay.
I think, right? We're not done with these words yet.
Not yet.
Let's keep going.
All right. You can even create some initial grammar thoughts, some little sketches about what the grammar might be from these name forms. Specifically, I want to focus on the name Lisan al-Gaib, where in the written form, as it's presented in the book, it's al-gaib with a capital G. That tells me that this al with the hyphen, which is lowercase, by the way, is most likely a grammatical element. And when I look at that, I automatically think might be some sort of preposition. It might be some sort of, important thing that becomes a clitic onto a noun. But it really puts in mind some sort of like preposition. And I say preposition because it's attached to gaib, which is the capitalized part, which tells me it's the more nouny part. And so I'm guessing this language probably has head initial structure. I would also at that point then assume that if the name actually means something, lisan is the head noun, and then al-gaib is a modifier. And so that's all just by looking at the structure and sort of logicking out where I think it is going.
Yeah.
All right, so now David is going to switch to a different example after this.
Sure.
So anything you want to say about these names?
Also, it should be noted that this was done just by looking at the words and ignoring whatever they were supposed to mean.
Yeah.
And so this is really just taking the words and getting as much as you can from them. And as Jesse showed you, you can get quite a lot. And sometimes some of these things might have been unintentional if you're working with an author. They might have thought, oh, I didn't know you could get that if I wrote that way. And it's like, well, think about it next time. But I would like to point out, so this is six words, 6 names. 5 of them were taken directly from Arabic. At least 3 of them were misspelled in some way, or changed in some way that either the author thought was unimportant in the original Arabic, or maybe somehow he thought he was making it clear. I honestly have no idea. And for all of them, without any guiding, without any pronunciation guide, most of them, just as you'd pronounce them as an English reader, are going to be misstressed, quite crucially. And that is really a shame. I always thought, just like Leisana, there's no long vowel there. There should be a long vowel in the first word. And then just taking the R sound and turning it into a G just because, to me, is very irresponsible. Anyway, there's a lot of decisions I wouldn't make here, but I do want to point something out, because the activity that we're talking about, right, is taking something that already exists, analyzing it, and then perhaps building new things that fit with it. And so now I want you to look at these if you're able to look at them. If not, again, we have Madib Lisanavai, Fremen, Sayyadina, Sihayan, Usul. And you say 5 of these are from Arabic, one of them is not. I think everybody would guess the one that isn't from Arabic.
Furman.
That's right. Because how do you look at the entirety of the Arabic language and think, well, the people who speak this language are going to be calling themselves something that begins with a consonant cluster, which is something that just cannot happen in Arabic. It's ridiculous. Absolutely. It's hilarious that it's like that's what they call themselves, really. And I think I'm fairly certain we could look this up. I think he got it as like, oh, it's going to be a shortening of free men
That's
from
totally
English.
actually what I was just going to say is
And
it
I was
looks like Freeman.
yeah, and why? Why are they calling themselves something that's a shortening from English that also, but that also, by the way, doesn't make sense. Uh, Freeman to Fremen, I don't know about that. With English. Anyway, and so it's like now you imagine yourself in a situation where you're doing exactly what Jesse is doing, where all the information you have is all of these count. Mm-hmm. All of these count as being a part of the language. Imagine if you were to take, like not knowing anything about English, and you were to take six words, and those words were kid, cart, boy, girl, man, psychologist. Yeah, they're all English words.
Oh, that's very true.
They're all English words, but it's like if you look at that and you don't know anything else, one of them's going to look pretty darn strange. But the thing is, if that's all the information you have, then that's what you have to go with when you're building from there on out. And essentially, like when an author writes a book, that is your source material. That is what you have to go with. And so it's like, all right, well, you made this. This is now a part of the language. This is now a part of the language. And so suddenly this language, which is supposedly like either exactly Arabic or heavily based on Arabic, now features consonant clusters, word initial consonant clusters. There you go. Anyway.
That's why it's a frameling. All right. So I do want to say sometimes, and in fact, in the experiment we'll be doing here, sometimes you have entire phrases or clauses, and they need to be accounted for as well in the structure. And so, like, I know, for example, in Shadow and Bone, a lot of what we were working with, specifically from the Shu language, just because I helped with that. So I know more about that one than the other ones. But, there were like entire sentences. There were little 2-word phrases. There were 3-word phrases. And so it's like there were a lot of pieces that we had to work around beyond the names. And so sometimes you do get that. And so, for instance, while creating Dothraki, David used sentences in the book as one of the starting points for the language. And so here we have, do you want to read this for us? And that was translated in the book as a prince's writing, and that was translated, as David had mentioned, as like the narrator, right, where it's like italics, like the subtitles.
Exactly.
And so you've got to take this and say, this is what this means.
Yeah, and if you read this little paragraph, essentially, like the part that's in quotes is actually the Dothraki. So Daenerys is saying, Chalaka Dothray. Next to that, outside of the quotes, in italics, a prince's writing.
Nice. Yeah. And then shortly after, right?
Same paragraph.
Same paragraph. Okay. We get
Khalaka Dothre Mranha.
And that is then translated to mean the prince rides inside me. Mm-hmm. And so now if you line these up, you're going to see that thankfully, oh my God, George R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
I almost forgot his name. It's R.R., right? Or is that just J.R.R. Tolkien?
No, it's George R.R. Martin too.
It's both.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Whew, I suddenly went on a little name blank there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, thankfully, he was very consistent with how he presented these two. Because a prince is riding, the prince rides inside me. Notice in English, there's a lot in common. We've got prince, we've got ride. They're both kind of ongoing or present-y type things. And look, if you think back to the Dothraki that was read, you have in both, they start with halakka. And did I stress that wrong?
No, that was correct.
Okay. And then dothrai.
Yep.
They both start with that. And the first one that ends with that too, because it's just a prince's writing. But then when inside me gets added, the mranha is added.
Yeah. By the way, I just wanted to point out if this were Aragon, right? A prince's writing would be, En Princio Arretenda. And the prince rides, though, would be Der Princio Rettas, you know? I love this because the italics show you that what we in English say in two different ways, right?
Yeah.
Rides is riding is the same thing in Dothraki. Where we have two different articles, a prince, the prince, same thing in Dothraki. That was beautiful. And that's exactly the type of thing you don't see with, a lot of beginning conlang work.
And with that then also indicates that in Dothraki, you have a and you don't have any a and the. Rather, I almost said you have them. You don't.
Yeah.
And so no articles. Great. And that also means that this sort of like ongoing aspect / if you're going to do tense prioritized present tense is going to be the same form. And that is important to know. That is very important to know that they come out the same. In a lot of languages they do. English is an oddball that way. And this also then tells you that the inside me comes after the verb, which means it goes verb, some sort of adverbial element, this adposition phrase. Because it goes verb and then the adposition phrase, probably going to be head initial-ish.
Yeah.
Which means, well, I will say I said verb just because I know dothrai is what you interpreted as the verb. But still could have gone VSO with this structure. But you went here, is it SVO for Dothraki?
Yeah, SVO.
SVO. But that because it's added at the end, the verb has to come before it, which suggests that it's more verb initial or head initial.
Yeah, and I want to point out what Jesse is talking about here is if this is all the data you have, there's absolutely no way to tell which one is right and which one is prince.
Yeah.
And so it could be either. The only thing you know for sure is which one is inside me.
Yeah.
And what English distinctions don't count.
Yeah.
If you look at the rest of the Dothraki, it's pretty clear which one is right and which one is prince. But you need the rest of that material to make that designation. Anyway.
Awesome. All right. So that's a sort of overview of the process. Yeah. So now we're going to talk about the setup of the experiment. The frameling experiment, if you will. We're going to set some ground rules here. And so we're each going to be working with the same data sample that I put together, and I'm going to present momentarily. So we're going to take the same data sample, and we're going to use it to create a language sketch. It doesn't need to be and should not be, given our current working schedules, should not be a complete language. Remind me of that in a couple weeks when I'm going to town and turning this into a whole thing. Remind me that it's really just a language sketch. So we're each going to have the same things to work with, and we're going to just not talk about what we work with in between. The data we get, I will stress this, it is currently in English. So when you look at the data, you're going to say, oh, so it's just English. It sure is. It is. But we need to forget that we know what it means. It's no longer English. It is now going to be treated as a different language. And not only is it going to be treated as a different language, it's going to be treated as units that were originally built without structure. And we need to build structure to support the data. So we actually need to create the language to support the data that we're given, just like we have with other things. Of course, no translations can be provided because it's well, the English was the English. And so I can't give translations to be make it mean this. And so I'm leaving this up to us. If we want to assign meaning, we can. We don't have to, though, because we can build a whole sketch and say here's the word order, here's the sounds that are in it. We can do all of that without ever assigning meaning. And so that's going to be personal choice for how far you want to take it, how far I want to take it, how far anyone participating at home wants to take it. And so that is not a part of this challenge.
Yeah.
In other words, we're going to treat it like italicized text that offers no direct translation into English. Now, I say italicized because a lot of writers, what they do is put the conlang or the language in italics and then
Yeah.
the English in regular type. And so that's why I say italicized. Earlier, we were talking about that being the subtitle or the translation. But what I mean is we're going to treat these units like they just appeared in text or like someone in the movie just said it and the only subtitle that shows up is speaking in another language.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know what they really said. All right. Our minimum output. So what we have to have is we do need to transcribe, or, IPA is really just the convenient way to transcribe. We do need to provide transcription so that way we can see if we had any different interpretations for the written forms. And then the descriptions of the sound system and phonotactics, like where we decided to assign stress or if we decided to assign tone, syllable structure, and so on. And then a basic grammar sketch. And so basically what I'm going to provide to you, David, and what I'm going to add as a PDF, and I'll also add it as a Pages document, it just may not help some people, to the podcast Patreon post is going to be a language sketch document that you can use and fill in. And there's two sections that are purple banners, and those are this is what David and Jesse have to do as a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
If you're following along at home, it's up to you how much you do. And that includes the phonology section, which is just the consonant chart, a vowel chart, stress or tone, and then syllable structure. And then the morphology and typology information, where it's just like, what's the predominant word order that you're choosing? Is it mostly head initial, head final, or is it a mixed headed language? Is it more analytic, agglutinative, fusional tendencies, and so on? And so again, like all of this can be done without any meaning assigned. You're just deciding where the units are and how you're going to interpret that as a language creator. All right, so that's the minimum output. Do you have any questions?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Excellent.
I'm intrigued.
Okay. All right. So, continuing the rules, our next episode, so episode 54, which will come out on August 1st, will compare our results. So, at minimum, you're going to have my results and David's results, and we'll compare those to talk about what systems might be generated from the exact same data sample. If you want to follow along and if you want to do a little bit of work with the language sample and you want your work to be included in the results podcast episode, then you need to send it to me by July 27th. And I put 2024 in there just in case somebody listens to this much later. It's not 2025, 2024. I need it by then so that way I can organize. And honestly, the sooner you can get it to me, the better. You need to send it directly to me.
Yeah.
Don't send it to anybody else. Don't post it in channels on Discord. Don't blast email everyone. This is just for me. And you need to send it to me either attached in an email or, message, a DM in Discord. Note that I will not actually open the attached file until I'm finished with my work. And so I won't be able to verify if like everything's in the file until after I finish what work I'm going to do, because I don't want to be like, persuaded or influenced is the word I was looking for. I don't want to be influenced by what you did with it. So anyway, send it directly to me if you want to participate by July 27th, 2024. All right, so the data source that I chose for what's coming up is the book Sushi for Beginners by Marian Keyes. I love her. She's a great author. Very fun. And I chose this book, and you may be, if you know the book, if you know what Marian Keyes writes, you know that she just writes fiction, and that it's not fantasy, it's not sci-fi. There's no reason really that a conlang would appear in her books unless she decided to write about conlangers. Like, that would be the only reason a conlang would appear. So you may be wondering, why? Why did you choose that book when you could choose a book that could have had a conlang, like The Princess Bride or something like that? And really, my two main reasons for doing that are that, one, I want to make sure any of the character names or place names are part of our English-speaking world because they're meant to be English data that we're working with, and not like invented names that are meant to represent character from a group of people that doesn't exist, because then they can be fanciful, and it doesn't quite fit how we would do names or do syllables in English, but we can make it work because it's in a book. You know what I'm saying? Um, and then the second reason was that it was not. I momentarily got confused by what I wrote. It's not intended to represent non-English speakers in general. And so it's not like the language being used is, I'm just going to say, sometimes writers who are like, oh, the speaker speaks something, a language we've never heard, but then they present it in English. They do it in the most archaic, flowery English you could imagine. And it's not natural. Everything I pulled from this book is natural. Like, it's not something that an English speaker or writer would not be able to put together. Maybe it's something you would never put together just because you would have never thought of saying it that way, but it's natural English. And that's the data I wanted to work with. I didn't want to work with something that was slightly unnatural, and therefore not taking English and making a frameling out of it. So I chose this book out of the many books on my shelf. And it spoke to me because a certain character name, I was like, oh, I love to see what we're going to do with that. And so I went with it. Now, at this point, stop looking at this half of the screen because it's going to show you previews.
Wait, am I not allowed to look?
When I show it on the left side, when everybody's able to see it, I will hold up there. my book and just cover. There we go.
Just set it down.
Well, it's propped open a little bit, and it will hit my keys, and it will
it'll
hit
be
the
fine.
thing.
It'll be fine. Trust me. Here, give it a shot. Give it a shot.
Oh my God, David's gonna kill the whole thing.
There you go.
Okay, that has a magnet in it. Is that bad to rest on
the screen?
It's
okay.
All right. So now that we've chit-chatted about things nobody can see but us, we're gonna talk about the data. And so this is the first time that David is seeing the data. I have put it together, and it is actually split into 4 categories of the types of information that we're using, but we need to account for it all. Okay. It's just I split it up by you'll see. I split it up.
Yeah, I really don't get it. Okay. Oh, geez.
So the first is character names.
Oh my God.
So this is the first category. It's these are people names, which mean that, they, even if they are assigned meaning, they're not going to necessarily affect the grammar structure as much. Necessarily, you may not get modifiers in names, for example. You may, but you may not. So it's you get to decide how you're going to treat personal names as opposed to some of the other things that we're going to have in the language.
Good Lord. And
so I'm going to read these out just as I would pronounce them, or as I have looked up and think they might be pronounced, because this author writes a lot of books that are set in Dublin. She is Irish.
Oh, okay. Well, that allows.
And so anyway, Aisling Kennedy, and I did say Aisling, if you didn't hear the angma, Aisling Kennedy, Yvonne Hughes, Clodagh Kelly, and Clodagh is spelled with a GH at the end. It's a nice Irish name. Lily Headley Smythe, and Bicycle Billy. These are all names that show up. I know, you're so excited. But a lot of books I was finding that I was just pulling at random. It's Ted. It's there's only so much you can do with Ted. This, I don't know what you're going to do with the EA. Is it going to be a diphthong? I don't know. What you going to do? Anyway, so we've got to decide. Again, we're treating this as a romanization that we're going to decide what the author intended because it's no longer English. Right? There are some place and brand names in the book, including Dublin. Colleen is actually the name of a magazine that several characters work for in the book. Trix, nice cereal. Although I think it was actually a person's name in this book, but I put it under brand name because it fits.
Yeah.
And Mercedes, same thing. I think it was actually used as a person name, but it could be a brand name. And these I put also as other names because they're only one words versus, the full names that I gave for the characters. All right, so that's the second category, other names. The third category is short phrases, and I capped them all at 2 words. So ominous silence, surefire success, soap opera, and sweet 16. A lot of S's in there. But those are just short phrases that now we got to figure out what do we think is going on in them in terms of what might we start seeing in terms of pattern. Do we see potential affixes or whatever? Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, the last one is going to be your favorite. We're going to pretend there's entire clauses that we need to look at and see if we can find something in them to help with what we're going to do with grammar. And I specifically chose clauses where there weren't a lot of function words because I wanted it to be language dense, if you get my drift. So I'm apologizing to David in advance. Here's the fourth and final category of the full clauses.
Oh, God.
Rancor and regret generated insomnia. Okay. Extreme familiarity, I can't even get the word out. Extreme familiarity and empty distance hung together. So again, we don't have to actually break these down and provide meaning for all the units. If we see parts that we want to say this unit might be associated with verbs, like we can break down as much as we want from within them, but we don't have to fully analyze it. The goal is to say what structures would you get from this? And they are both like the first sentence is 5 words. So that is something that we would see in a book that we need to work with. That's not out of the question. And the second one is 7 words. So again, they're shorter sentences in the sense that there's not a lot of words. This might be something that could be just tossed into a book and someone say, this is what it is.
You can't see me, but I'm crying.
Is it that extreme familiarity and empty distance hanging together? Or is it rancor and regret that are generating insomnia right now in your brain?
Goodness gracious. Oh my God. English is the worst language.
Okay, so it took me a long time, by the way, to find sentences I was happy with. And it's not that I'm happy with them because I'm like, these are the best sentences ever.
And you didn't notice that this one had Ted in it?
Well, that was on purpose. I wanted there to be a Ted in the language. I just didn't want it to be as short as a name. But within these units, there are a lot of pieces that can go either way. For instance, I tried to make sure I didn't just choose elements that you would have to analyze everything as suffixes because that's, what's there right in front of you. I wanted it to be more open. I wanted it to be something that you could like rearrange things a bit differently. And as I mentioned, I didn't want a lot of function words because I wanted it to be potentially up to interpretation about where words fit, where they go, head initial, head final, and so on. Like I wanted there to be more options. And for there to be more options, you need some ambiguity almost syntactically, if that makes sense. And so, yeah.
If I can give anybody who wants to partake in this challenge some advice, it would be to go back and do with this data just what Jesse did with those 6 names in Jacobsa, in Fremen, because this is going to be really hard. This is going to be really hard for English speakers. You need to find some way to distance yourself. You need to put some empty distance between yourself and these words, because the meanings and their pronunciations are going to throw you. Instead, try to break it down in some way and then look at the abstraction and work from the abstraction. I think that's how you have to do it.
I agree. And so, along those lines, the quicker you can get it into whatever IPA you think is going to represent how this should be. Again, you're not providing a transcription of how English speakers would say it. You're providing a transcription of if I assume this is a romanization and spelling makes sense, and how do I normally treat romanization? How might I treat this data? And the sooner you can get those transcriptions done and then throw away the original English input, the better,
Yeah.
in my opinion. The PDF, I will, of course, to the Patreon podcast post, I will be including a full PDF of the slideshow. I will also be including the document that I created for David and I to fill out for language sketches. So that way, if you want to do it at home, you can. And in that document, I include the language data again. If you're doing this on your own at home, and on your own, if you're just doing it for yourself, you can also feel free to say omit the full clauses and just deal with the names and the short phrases to see what you come up with. That would especially be interesting, I know, to me, to see like just what sounds you assigned, if nothing else, just to see if we match and how we think, for instance, syllables are coming together, or how certain vowels and consonants might sound. So like I feel like we could get a lot of good information just from that if you want to participate, but you don't want to tackle the clauses. David has no choice. David has to tackle the clauses. And like I've spent now enough time staring at this data that I've already got ideas, so I've got a head start on David.
She thinks that.
Do you have ideas?
Of course.
Listen, I specifically chose data that I could. No, actually, it was actually really hard for me, because talk about needing to distance yourself from English. One thing I didn't want to do was present all this English data where it's like you end up just really still having English. I wanted to make sure there were choices involved, and so I wanted to make sure that there were words where it's like you could pronounce it differently, other than just saying it's Ted versus Ted versus Tud.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want those to be the major differences of our languages. And so I was looking for some complexity in the forms to give us more wiggle room to have some fun with it. But it was incredibly hard to sort of look at forms that my brain immediately recognized as English words, obviously, and say what else could be done with it.
Yeah.
And then I actually had a much longer list of character names that I might include. And I ended up taking some out because I realized that really they just overlapped in patterns from what was already there in other names. And so I wanted to condense what we had and not overwhelm us with more data. But yeah, it was a really hard experience doing that. And I mean, I know David knows because he watched as I went through book after book and did heavy as I threw a book aside, or as I flipped through the pages of Sushi for Beginners, I don't know, like 20 times, as I just kept going over and kept finding the same pages. So I guess the spine was broken just so that I kept flipping open to the same pages. But yeah, one of the book titles that I took out was one of the characters was reading an encyclopedia of mushrooms. And I took it out as a piece of language data for here because, again, it gave too many function words. And it gave a suggestion of what you might expect for word order.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that. I really wanted that ambiguity. And so, anyway, that one was hard for me to get rid of, though, because I already had an idea for how I might say encyclopedia, and I was so excited, and I wanted it in there, and I had to cut it for experimental purposes. So, anyway, that is all I have for this episode. David, do you have any other wise words to share?
No. Man, you really did do a good job. My goodness.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It was a journey.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this is going to be something. I look forward to seeing who among you is up to the challenge.
And like it's already killing me that I can't tell David the ideas that I came up with. And the things that I'm itching to go get my own copy of the language sketch document so that way I can start typing them up. And yeah, it's gonna be hard not to chit chat about this until we're both finished. But I will not chit chat with you until we're finished. All right. Well, oh, and actually, even then, I know I need to see your results before I
Yeah.
put the next slideshow together, so it won't be a surprise to both of us.
All right.
But anyway, thank you all for being here and being a part of this opening podcast episode. Um, and we look forward to seeing what comes our way and look forward to next month when we talk about those results. Until then, stay grammar.
Bye, everybody.